Awesome. All right. Welcome back to my channel, Quest for Faith with Brian. And today I have a special guest, Brandon. And we tried to do a video, I don't know, that was 6 months ago. And life happened with me and we couldn't get, I couldn't line it up. So I'm really glad to have him on my channel today, tonight. I'm going to keep saying tonight because we're recording this pretty late at night. So, yeah, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, you had reached out to me and I love your channel, the few videos you've done, and I definitely encourage you to keep doing them because I think you have a different flavor of your videos that I've seen in other places, and it's really cool. So keep doing them.
Thank you.
And everyone, I will have a link to his channel down below, so you guys can check that out. Please go and check out his channel and all that. But I think most of the time when I talk with people about their conversion story, um, it rarely goes to the atheist, going from atheist to back believing to Catholicism, and it's just an interesting topic for me. But let's kind of start at the beginning, like growing up, because I think you said when we were talking here before we started recording, there was a like that Protestant angle before you became atheist. So what was life like faith-wise for you early on in your early childhood?
Well, I wasn't raised religious, so I was brought up, I suppose, secular. I was brought up secular, and the only knowledge I really had of how the world worked was through a scientific framework. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, science, like anything else, is biased for the most part. If you think science is just facts, well, sure, you can define science as that, but the way we present science is going to be biased. But anyway, regardless of that note, when I would study science, it was largely on the issue of evolution, um, just the different time periods and whatnot. Studying that, and it fascinated me. Absolutely, just obsessed my brain about this stuff, and the function of how nature works. It's like there's a balance that is intrinsic to it, and so if you look at evolution, there's the famous chart of a monkey turning into a human or whatever,
Yep.
right? Or an ape, I should be
Yeah,
correct,
yeah.
right? Um, and it's like, well, okay, where is this leading? Why does it not devolve, right? And I mean, sure, there might be some rare case someone alleges about that. Regardless of that, it seems that everything is set up to an order and to prosper. And maybe some species go away, but that's so the new species can thrive. It's like the concept of a forest fire. We don't like
Mm-hmm.
forest fires. We try to fight against it. But why is there such a thing that exists on this earth? Well, it's to get rid of the overgrowing old trees and plants in order for the new young ones to thrive. So it's an intrinsic balance between those two opposites. And I like, well, what is that balance that's there? And so I'm not going to keep it too long in this note, but to get to the point, I always knew in my intuitive that there was what I would say is a creator, what I would call God, because what else could be behind that? It's ordered, and something for it to be ordered, I could just I viewed it in the manner that there had to be something leading us towards an ultimate good, because that's the manner that evolution functions, and the way that the universe is itself, in a sense, is towards a good. Well, what is good? So now we're getting to philosophy. So
Right.
I always knew in the back of my mind from a young age, from as a kid, that God is real, and that was just an intuitive for me. Even though I was not raised religious, there was an argument I got into with an atheist once online, which I don't recommend. Not because they're an atheist, just with anyone really. Online isn't
Yeah,
a best place to
it
fight
can
with
be
anyone.
toxic.
And I was saying, I wasn't raised religious, not taught about God, and yet I always knew. I don't know if I believed in God, but I knew God was real, and I would always pray before I went to bed. I would just talk to God for a little bit, and I especially liked it because things I would ask for, I would start getting. I like that part, but
Right.
I would also try to show my love and appreciation to God more than anything else. Um, and that was just how my childhood, I suppose, was. And the argument I got into was basically the person was saying, "Well, you weren't raised religious, you weren't taught about God, so it can't be true." Well, I'm not here to convince you about my childhood. It's my childhood, so I know what happened in my memory. But that's what happened to me. So that was just sort of my childhood. I don't know where you want me to move
No,
on
I
from there.
think that's great because I think, the Bible says have faith like a child. And I think when you're a kid and you see the wonders of the world and how big it is, and there's just mystery in everything, even like how the heck did that tree grow, and you start seeing these things, and it's hard not to have some intuitive sense of awe that something has to be creating this. And I think a lot of kids, it's I think it's just intuitive for especially younger kids to understand that. And I think to the doubts come in when you get older and you start having that you start trying to prove everything, right? But I think that's a beautiful way to describe it. Because I mean, I think even for me growing up, right? Like I grew up always going to church. Like I don't remember a time when we didn't go to church as a kid. And but my understanding of God, yeah, it was church and I knew the stories, but in nature is where you see it, and human interaction too. You see it there. But I think you literally looking outside and seeing the amazing things and now I know that there's so much mathematical stuff that's out there that everything has a purpose. And you look at physics and you look at other sciences and it's like, man, all this stuff just works together and it's incredible. And no wonder that when you're a kid, you're just in awe of everything, And it brings me back to thinking of I used to go camping in Yosemite National Park for a week every year when I was a kid. And standing there being, 7, 8 years old and looking up at these gigantic mountains that are towering over me and just wondering, like, wow, how did that get there? It's just it's awe-inspiring. And to me, it always intuitively pointed to God. And I think it did for you too.
And there will be people who will look at the death, the chaos, all the violence, not just between humans, that, but also nature,
Hmm.
and will take a nihilistic approach to say, well, therefore God can't exist, or if he is, does he exist? If he does exist, then he's, it's the typical thing they'll say. He's either not all powerful or not all good. Why would this be permitted? And I think it's also a greater proof because it's also when you take the argument of suffering, that you look at nature, you see the forest fires, you see the destruction, and if you're raised without a religious upbringing, for instance, the story of Adam and Eve and whatnot, where from the scientific, if you want to call it scientific, naturalist framework of perceiving the world to a series of evolution, it seems like it's just death, resurrection with each period and life form. And it's like, well, what's the point of it? It's always just ends up just in extinction. We're just going to be like the dinosaurs someday, and another civilization might look back at us. Who knows? Well, it's a very narrow mindset. I think it's very nihilistic and narrow because, again, I go back to my point. The point of a forest fire is to bring forth the new plants and whatnot. So even the death in nature uh, is something that is necessary to establish that life. Now, I do see in the biblical context where death is a symptom of the fallen world. I'm not contradicting that.
Right.
But I'm just trying to say solely from an understanding within this sort of scientism framework of today that people like me were brought up in, you can still work out God in it at the end.
Oh, 100%. And for me too, the idea that humans are death and destruction, and that argument that I hear a lot, if God was real, then why would he let all these people suffer? Why would all this stuff happen? I don't think he's real because of that. I go back to, so you want a God that doesn't give you free choice? Like, because if you think about it, right? Like if we didn't have free will, and God was like, "No, you're going to be peaceful and I don't care. This is exactly what's going to happen. You have no choice but to act like this." And bam, we have zero free will and we're in this type of place. And I would rather, for me, the argument for me is like, no, I want free will. I want to be able to choose my own path. And I think for me, that argument always fell on its face because I'm like, yeah, well, if the world was perfect, and we didn't have free will. We didn't have the ability to choose the path Jesus laid before us. Um, we would just be slaves. We wouldn't be adopted sons and daughters of Christ or of God.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where I would lead it, but the issue again, like a lot of this is like I would question a lot of this when I was like a little child, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, this is going back to my earliest years. I mean, even at 7 and whatnot, earlier then, but primarily like that's when was perhaps my peak. Um, Other than departing from the realm of science and naturalism for a moment, why is there imperfection? I mean, as a child especially, a lot of things don't go your way. A
Yeah.
lot of things don't go your way, especially as a child. You get in trouble, or your mom, your dad says no to something. So a lot of times things don't go your way. So when I would try to go to sleep, and I would struggle going to sleep, so I was just kind of left in my brain, which left me to ponder on questions until I got to the basis of it, even if that meant there would be another night and another night on the same question. One of them was just like, why are things the way they are, primarily on the issue of suffering. And I don't know if this is satisfying for everyone, but my answer was really is this. So, how are things right now? There is something called suffering or pain. You can argue about which better defines it. Um, and we have this thing, and so you can question, well, why? Why could it not be better? A universe without that thing, whatever that might be. Well, assume there wasn't that thing. Imagine if there was no pain or whatever, and it was just the way things were today without that aspect of death. I would presume that we would be questioning, well, why is there not any pain in the world? Why is there no conflict we face that hurts us and gives us a motivation at risk to
Hmm.
trigger us in a sense? So I'm not sure if I'm putting this right or not, but I always found that if we can question the way things are, which ultimately is the argument from suffering, why would God allow suffering in the world? It's a point of asking, why are things the way they are? Well, if things were different, I'm sure we would still be asking, why are the things the way they are? And if it wasn't
Right.
suffering here, well, why is there no
Why is
suffering?
it so boring?
Yeah.
It's
And
probably
I
where
think that
we'd
would
go.
be, mm-hmm. Dostoevsky, I believe, got into a bit of that in some of his work too. So that if you imagine the sort of utopia that a lot of political movements wish for, where everyone just gets whatever and is just provided for, and it's just a quote unquote utopia, which really is just a disguise, a persona for a truly dystopian setting.
Yep.
Well, again, we would want to just break the wall, punch it in the wall, punch our fist in the wall, or something, just cause a little thing, drop the glass on the floor, do something that causes a little bit of chaos. And, because in the state of that our world is in, as it has fallen, that chaos is something that is intrinsically here for the moment, and it's for the greater good ultimately. So it is, as much as there's a balance of chaos and order, the chaos itself leads into a greater order. But we're not there yet, of course. But that's the second coming. But uh, you have to understand, the greatest issue, I suppose, today sociologically is nihilism, escapism. We don't want to admit that hardships are an aspect of life.
Yeah. And we don't like to look at the benefit of hardships. I mean, there's and I love the Catholic perspective on suffering, where it's like, man, this is how you're getting sanctified. Like this is where
Yes.
you're going to be going through this because um the Lord's letting this happen to you, and with the idea of you're going to become you're either going to become stronger and go more towards him and be more sanctified, or you're not, because you get free will. But the idea is that this suffering, offer it up to the Lord,
Right.
to be more holy.
Yes, I have the
um
crucifix here. So
yeah.
everything that I'm going through, to unite it to the cross, right? To be brought to perfection. So that's what it is. It's redemptive suffering. We, as the scripture says, we make up for what's lacking in the sufferings of Christ.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, if you want to move on, we can.
Yeah. So you said that was kind of your early childhood, and then what kind of when did you start dabbling into? Did you go like agnostic to atheist, or kind of that roller coaster
Well,
of in between?
I did not stop believing in God yet. I well, I would say at this point I was 13 years old, and there was someone, don't know who, just a stranger on the street, who, and I was with my mom. So I was with my mom on the street, and there was a stranger who started talking to my mom. And this stranger was talking to my mom, and he started talking to her about Christ and about the faith. My mom wasn't necessarily receptive to it. She was respectful, but not receptive to the word. However, I was overhearing it, and everything he was saying wasn't necessarily profound. It was very basic, but he was sharing his faith nonetheless. And there was something so deep that wanted to make me cry at his words. And like
Hmm.
I had to hold back tears, as it were. And so that kind of impacted me. And I started to think, okay, well, there's something to this. And so I would pray to God as I would, yet in the name of Christ. And I would pray to God in the name of Jesus. And this was during Easter of 2016, that I had a dream that really impacted me. That Christ is real, that the faith is true. And this dream, I told my mom about it. I wrote it down at the time, and it was always impactful. Now I'm gonna try to not get into the dream because
Yeah.
I think it will be better to leave it a bit later because it makes sense later on, that dream. Um, but anyway, uh, I was when I approached Christianity, it was very much just, the internet was the only thing I had, and so it was very Protestant and anti-Catholic. A lot of the
Yeah.
typical stuff that you'll hear, and stuff attacking how, oh, why are you Catholics praying to Mary, to the saints? Why do you confess your sins to a priest? Uh,
Yep.
all these
All the
things,
usual
and
tropes.
yeah, purgatory is nowhere in the Bible. Which to that I say, well, you just haven't read the Bible. But
Right.
regardless of all that, you know, I understood that religion or faith was significant, especially in today's structure. We are a post-Christian country, a post-Christian
Yes.
civilization. So if you look at what, for instance, I can go through many analogies. One analogy is that of the leader, because the leader embodies, he is a persona of the people, and ultimately from the perspective of the people, the collective, that is us as the society, and the people, the community, our personification is ultimately supposed to be what the leader embraces and possesses. So if you study leaders throughout history, I mean, they're very upright in their exposure. There's the famous statue of Alexander the Great, the painting of Napoleon. All these things were pointing upward,
Yeah.
and there's still glimpses of that today. But for the most part, our leaders are very stern. They kind of just act like a still tree, the way
They're
they
not
they
charismatic anymore.
yeah, and the, I think as a representative of the people, it speaks very deep depths on a psychoanalytical perspective. Uh, so that's one framework. But other than that, it's like, what are the because the leader isn't everything. He's leading us to something. What is it? It's to some sort of ideal or ideals. So what are those ideals? Well, if you look throughout history, what made nations great, it was maybe the military strength, just becoming the strongest you could. Ultimately, leading to God was the ultimate ideal that people would hold. It was their faith. Um, and that's what made a flag of a nation. Our flag was that. But
Yeah.
and that's the considering that that the highest faculties of human nature. Of course, God is beyond human nature, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, so now we look at it, and even it's on our flag. Even we celebrate as our ideals what's true to our lowest faculties. Okay, so take me, I'm a human, right? What are my lowest faculties? Well, I would guess like what, just my ethnicity, my gender, my sexuality would be like the lowest one can go in terms of
Yep.
human faculties and the most primitive state that one is in. Think of a tribal humanoid like living in a cave or whatnot. They're that's all that they really do. And I'm not talking about someone who lives in a tribe, but an actual,
Yeah. Yeah. I
going
gotcha.
back to the
No.
scientific. sort of framework of the
Sociology
day,
framework. Yeah.
a caveman, whatever you want to call him back then, right? Um, that was basically all it is. It's about reproducing, making sure you have food, sticking to your tribe, and yet that's all that we have as our pride today. It is that, and it's very scary because people will cheer in celebration, and they'll seem happy, but it's really to
It's hollow.
it's to make silent the outcry that our culture is going through, that is of a self-suicide, and it is being stoned to death, as it were, and there's a massive cry, and so we cheer and shout to cover our the so we don't hear the wailings, as it were. And it's sort of the death of God concept by Nietzsche, not literally, of course, but as a figurative sort of metaphor of being a post-religious society in that sense. Even architecturally, if you look at how
You're
ancient Europe,
speaking my language, man.
if you look at ancient Europe, you have a village that a church or a cathedral oversees. I'm of a Chinese background, so even then, in China, ancient China, you
The
have a
temples and
village, or there's some town, and on the top of the mountain overseeing it is a monastery of some kind. So there is a relation between the natural, the material. It's not bad. We're not Puritans. We don't think that anything that is material is evil. We understand that God created both the body and spirit. So we value nature and whatnot as creation of God. And we understand that God made Adam initially as a gardener, as it were, to care for creation. But what was overseeing that? The monastery. And yet, look today, I can go to Toronto and you have a small church or maybe a cathedral of all things, but you look around you and it's being overtowered by business buildings.
yeah.
It's a complete inversion, even on how we build society. And what we build manifests from our psychology, so it reveals the state of our nature, the state of our being, the
Yes.
state of our culture. So it's already antichrist, not in the sense of the person himself, but in the philosophy and the idea of it. So
Yeah, I agree 100% with that because you look at medieval architecture and like when I was growing up it was always the dark ages, right? And I think I'm pretty sure that was a Protestant phrasing because the
yeah,
Catholic Church was dominant during that time, so they called it the dark ages. But man, you look at all of these amazing cathedrals and churches that they built and did unbelievable things because they were always looking up to try and better themselves, and they were putting everything towards God and
right.
not looking down towards themselves. And so every ounce of that the villagers around there that extra they would have, they'd be at the monastery, or they would be donating their land if they could to the church because everyone was trying to look for that ideal of going up. And now we don't look up anymore. We
Right.
we look down. And you're exactly right with our architecture today. Like I hate modern architecture because it is so bland, it is so cold, and it is never striving to the glory of God. And that's what the big buildings back then, if it was going to be a tall building, it was going to be dedicated to God, not dedicated to money,
And that's the problem. There's no respect for the individual, right? We're all just viewed as lab rats. In a sense, communism is already here in
Oh
the
yeah,
sense of
100%.
architecture.
Yeah, Mary wasn't lying at Fatima. The heirs of Russia has spread. It's here.
Yeah. The when you grow up in school, back in the day, in the classroom, you would see a crucifix, a cross, usually in your classroom, and the reason for that is it's aiming towards something that's outside of yourself. Literally, you are perceiving something in front of you, so it's outside. Yeah, it's something greater because it's ultimately God, and it's calling a purpose and meaning. That is the significance of Christ dying for us. But now they replace it with the pride flag and say, well, what is that exactly? It's your identity. So it's something outside of you that you're looking at, a flag, an object, a material. Yeah, it's representing your ego, your identity. In this case,
Yeah.
the ego of your sexuality and gender and race. And so it casts you cast your view out of yourself to this thing that casts it back on you. So it's a very egotistical egomaniac framework of perception from a
Yeah,
young age.
and I think that goes even not just for pride, but I think that goes for a number of different things. If it's my alma mater for what college I went to, or um, I, I mean, I could think of a number of different things. I served in the if you served in the military, you know, like you hear if that's your identity, man, like okay, great. You did something cool once. If you were a jock in high school and you still talk about, you know, I was a star, I was a stud quarterback, and it's like awesome. So 20 years ago, you were good at throwing a football. What have you done since then? Like, how are you improving yourself and looking for the as ideals? And we're just not as a society doing that.
And that's the problem between how we uphold the lowest faculties of our human nature as though they are the highest, and we suppress the highest faculties as though they are the lowest. Oh, well, your faith is personal. Well, no, that's the highest faculty of our being. So that's beyond just, sexuality, race, ethnicity. These things are important. I'm not saying like your race doesn't matter at all. Like, oh, just don't look at it. Color is invisible, or whatever. Like, I'm not saying that's like to neglect it. But again, faith supersedes it. And
Yep.
so that is what guides our culture, where when it doesn't, I mean, that's where, Western civilization, in this case, we're seeing its death. And
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. And when I say I'm hopeful, I don't mean that I see our civilization being saved. I don't necessarily know if it can be at this point. But again, let's go to this point. We have something called separation of church and state. And I
Hmm.
understand that one can make an argument for either case. I'm not going to go into the actual argument, and I don't really care about that right now. But if you look at it just objectively, you have a separation of church and state. So the state, the emperor, the empire, the civilization, our Western civilization, it's going to fall, as all empires do. Not that it's a literal empire, but you get the metaphor.
Yeah.
Once the state falls, and I'll let you answer this just with a yes or no, and then I'll go on. Will the church fall with it?
No.
And why is that? Because it's separated.
Yeah.
So my issue with separation of church and state has nothing to do with how people talk about if there's no separation, well then the church is going to control the state and it's going to be corrupt church leaders, or the state is going to control the church and suppress religion, as has been seen numerously throughout history and even today. My only point with a lot of these sort of modern American philosophies, primarily, not that they're primarily American, you can root them to Europe, of course. Separation of church and state. The issue with it is that it's a very narrow temporal view of sociologically of history. That's the word, just
Yeah.
history. Um, because again, when the state collapses, you're setting an inevitable triumph for the church to be in power then. So I'm not saying what should or shouldn't be done, but I'm just saying that how things work, people aren't thinking long enough, as it were, in
Yeah.
terms of things like that.
Yeah, and I mean that whole concept of church and state, like it's not in our laws. Like that's the crazy part. Like that
Right.
was literally in a letter I think Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Adams. It was in a letter. It's not even part of our laws. It was just the only thing that is in our law is that the state can't dictate how you practice your faith.
The concept too,
So
people don't, when you say separation of church and state, it's like, I wonder, what is your idea of both church and state? The church, and I'm not going to really go into theology right now in the
yeah,
Catholic Church. I'm just going to speak objectively from just a materialistic view. It's the body of a belief. It's a body of a belief. So you have many churches, many different professions and creeds that people hold to. If there is a separation of church and state, you're really just alleging a separation of the state from the Christian church. That's what you're saying.
yeah,
Well, in that case, there's going to be a different church in charge of the state, or else the state itself becomes the church. Carl Jung talks about that in his book, The Undiscovered Self. I have it over there, so I could take a look at the
yeah,
title for a minute. But when the state kills religion, kills God, it becomes God. It becomes the church. You see that in North Korea. With all due respect to their politics, you'll see where their leaders are venerated
as
as
gods.
possibly as gods, as the ancient pharaohs were in that case. Of course, Pharaoh, the ancient Egyptians, did not kill their religion. it was just so intrinsically ingrained. Whereas, you look at North Korea, and with at least suppression or repression of religion, the state itself becomes that, and people have religious experiences before their leaders in government. You'll see those videos where people are crying and whatnot, and a lot of people make fun of them as acting. I'm sure most of them are because they don't want to get in trouble. They're
Right.
told they have to keep crying, or whatever. But I'm sure that a lot of them are legitimately crying, and it's how their emotions are stirred. Where this is the whatever's beyond themselves, the closest they can get to God. This leader they have of their nation is the closest they can get to feeling that or having any glimpse or idea of such a thing. So that is the
Yeah.
most that they have, in which case it triggers a religious experience. So the issue with that, there has to be a backbone to our culture. There has to be a backbone to what upholds Western civilization and any civilization. And if it's not God, if it's not religion, then what is it? There's going to be some lower faculty. And so when you get rid of the church as the backbone to uphold a civilization, something has to replace it, which is why you see all these competing things going on. Socialism, communism versus fascism, and conservatism and traditionalism, all these things going on. And then you have nihilism amidst all that. Ultimately, it's because something is trying to replace the backbone. What is that going to be? I don't know.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. But whatever it's going to be, it's probably going to be a little bit extreme, regardless of wherever it
Yep.
is on the line.
100%. So, we kind of got off track on that a little bit, but I love it. So I'm good. I'm here for it. You're you're right up my alley with this conversation. But you were talking about you had a dream about Christ, and then you started looking into um started surfing the web, and so obviously I'm assuming that because you were seeing all the anti-Catholic stuff, you first started looking into Protestantism first, or the
Yes.
non-denom path, or Bible Church.
Well, God was pulling me to the Catholic Church, but I was not. I was refusing, basically. I mean, I look back now
Been
and I
there,
see how there was things going on. Uh, there was a Catholic church I lived by, and so whenever I wanted to go to church, that was the church I would have to go to. Um, and so I would go there, I think, on Fridays or Saturdays just for a service there. And there's simple things like that. And the dream definitely was impactful, but if it wasn't impactful then, it was impactful later on. So I explored Protestantism, anti-Catholic Protestantism, very typical. Just I would never identify as a Protestant. Well, at sometimes I would, um, just because of how anti-Catholic I was, and I actually knew the definition of Protestantism. I would use that label at
yeah,
times. But for the most part, I would just say I follow Christ. I'm a
Protestant.
Christian. So I would read the Bible cover to cover a few times or so, or a couple times. Um, I was very into it. I was definitely very devoted. Um, but again, I was leaning on my own understanding, which of course is rebuked in the proverb. Your own interpretation is the Bible, and I would use YouTube, pastors I would find, or theologians, or people I liked that I would find on the internet and watch their stuff and their own interpretations. But all of this is just madness of following one's own understanding. And the proverb says, the fool is right in his own eyes, and that's exactly where it was, exactly where all these people are,
Yeah,
and no discernment in that. It's like, okay, well, you have to discern the spirits, but how? Oh, well, here's someone else to give you interpretation on how you discern spirits. Well, that falls into the same issue, right in their own eyes, their own understanding. Well, down the line, I mean, it went on for a while. I would primarily go to that one Catholic church. I was with some friends and we walked by that church. Now, at this point, I did know a Protestant church. I think it was Pentecostal. Um, don't really know about its denomination for sure, but it was very big and well known. I would go there whenever I could, and I liked it. I liked it. It was definitely something that I fancied a lot, so I would go there. But anyway, regardless of that, I was with my friends, a group of friends from high school, and we were well. This was before high school, so right about high school, almost high school. I was with some friends, and we were walking by the Catholic church there, and they started to make jokes and laugh about it, whatnot. Later on, now in high school, kind of just the same phase. Um, my anti-Catholicism is kind of going down a little bit, but I'm still kind of Protestant and whatnot.
hmm,
I'm with my friends, new friends, high school, going by that same Catholic church, and they're all making fun of it, making jokes, whatnot. And I always kind of felt uncomfortable, even though I was kind of anti-Catholic in interiorly. I just felt
Right.
uncomfortable about it. It was like, well, I mean, they're not making fun of Catholicism; they're making fun of Christ, who they see on the church, and so it's like, well, I don't know, I just don't like it really necessarily the jokes they're making, but that would happen, and eventually, I suppose a lot of it was just the social settings. I got into dating and relationships and whatnot, which is just trashy. And it's like, I think a lot of that stuff should just not be a part of our culture. Like for high schools have, these reunions, where guys get to meet girls and whatnot. It's like, well, it's just a hookup culture. Like the
Yeah.
fact that teachers and those ruling the schools who are adults think this is how youth can come together is idiotic and just shows that all these people are just devil possessed for the most part. Not literally, but maybe
I know
sometimes.
what you mean.
But anyway, so the life goes on, and I become an atheist. I just kind of give up, and which is kind of stupid of me, presuming everything that happened prior before me. But I was listening to a lot of Richard Dawkins, a lot of those types of guys, like watching a lot of those videos, and like my childhood of staying up at night questioning. I would stay up for the day, basically. It was kind of just I don't know, weird, but I would just spend an hour just contemplating the questions, right, about God and whatnot, and trying to figure out. Now, due to my bias, I would always lead to God doesn't exist or it doesn't matter or whatever. Now, I look back at when I was an atheist, and the way it was this: I was building a wall to block God out of my life, to block God and religion out of my life. So I don't really know if I never actually didn't believe in God. I don't know if I actually lacked belief, despite that I was an atheist or professed to be so. It was more so that I just blocked God out of my life. I blocked it out of my life. And in a sense, just that's what I did. And so life went on, and I was an atheist. I didn't care. I felt like, oh, I'm happy. I can do whatever I can do. I'm not bound by any rules or whatever. I just can do
Right.
whatever. Like life is life, right? It was very relative, subjective, whatnot. Anyway, there was a madness that started to drive at me. And, if I was back in Nietzsche's time, I'm sure they would have thrown me into an asylum with him. But it was just a madness that was driving me. And it was just, I felt like I was going into an insanity due to this cycle of questioning and atheism. Yet, because I saw something in religion, especially from the social structure, as I mentioned earlier. But I just ended up denying it and pressuring it out of everything and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it created a madness where there was a religious experience I had. And I know that people will critique or criticize religious experiences like, oh, well, how can you find it in any truth? It's so subjective to have an experience. Well, everything you have an experience. Right now, us talking and listening is an experience. That's what life
Right.
is. That's what humanity is. It's an experience. So your evidence from a scientific view is an experience, a perspective that one has. You cannot escape an experience. That's again nihilism and escapism. So I did have a religious experience, and it wasn't like something I saw. It was more just a weight, and it was like God had smashed through that wall that I built to block him out of my life, and God just came crashing through that wall like it was nothing. And I felt humiliated because it just like it felt like it was the tiniest little push that it just all came crashing down.
Yeah. He just kind of
Like
went,
like the Tower of
he just
Babel.
flicked it. Yeah. There we go.
That's what
Thank
it
you.
was, the Tower of
Yeah.
Babel. But in my psychological mind, was the Tower of Babel that I built, and it just came crashing down, and I felt humiliated. God humiliated me, and I was humbled by God, and I would just before God basically, and I realized that, to think that I knew anything at all was nothing but just my pride and ego, and so I had to start from zero again, and this time not just thinking, oh, well, it's one picture to other, but just realizing that I knew nothing for a moment. And so that's where I started to approach faith, not so much just from what I was thinking, but also from an honest point of view of trying to look at it rationally, as it were, and using my brain to think about things. So at that point, I knew God was real. And again, like earlier. So that's sort of the atheist phase that came after my Protestant anti-Catholic phase, I suppose. So anyway, I started to look, and I saw some conversion stories, some people who came to the Catholic Church,
Mm-hmm.
and they were remarkably, they sounded like my story. Basically, they sounded exactly like my story. So I was like, well, if their story ended up with the Catholic Church, I suppose that might be the church I ended up being a part of. And I knew that was kind of something interesting because, well, that was the church that I wanted to be least part of, uh,
Right.
from from that time following. But I was like, you know what? I don't know anything. I'm just new. I'm just a baby, as it were, like, just brand new, and I'm just open to learn. I'm just receptive, right? A servant is not greater than his master, or a student is not greater than his teacher, right? So I was just receptive to learn. The fool is right in his own eyes, it says, right? And so I'm
Yep.
not trying to be right. I know that I know nothing, right? As the philosopher says. So that's where I'm at that point.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, to you obviously were humbled to, because just in this 40 minutes we've been talking, I can tell you're always thinking. You're a thinker,
Hmm.
and to go, okay, I don't know anything. And honestly, that was kind of my story to an extent, because the more I started learning about Catholicism, the more I was like, wow, I've been lied to my whole life, or how did I not know this? And really kind of questioning everything again. It's a humbling experience, but yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, honestly, because I think it's amazing that I just did a video was this week. I think I published it on prayer, um, and that God's always calling us, and prayer is an answer to God's call. It's not that we're like, oh, I should pray to God. It's like, oh, we're answering His call. It's not the we're not calling Him. He's calling us, and we're answering His call.
Yes.
And I think that's what was happening there with you, is God's like, no, I'm still here, dude. I'm still here. Sorry, your wall
Yeah.
stinks. It's gone, and I'm here.
And it's like, I believe St. Paul says this in the New Testament, where it was as if God, took the scales off my eyes, the anti-Catholic bigotry I had. Paul, who was a Jewish extremist at that point, was killing Christians. He thought he was serving
Hmm.
God. Uh, well, I was in the same sense, not killing, but persecuting my words on the
Yep.
internet primarily, thinking that I was actually on the side of God, in this case of being Protestant. And when I was an atheist doing the same to just religion in general, well, I thought I was on the side of truth. So, like St. Paul, God needed to take those skills off my eyes to just humble me and realize that I knew so little, and just the abyss of the unknown being before me. And even though I didn't see anything, it's like a vision, it's like an apparition, as it were. But my journey to Catholicism, I mean, there's a lot of little details and whatnot that I don't know if I can get through each of them, but I would just say, like, I felt called, and it was a calling home.
Yeah.
And so when I decided to go back, it was actually to the Catholic Church that I was originally going to, not out of my preference, but I was going there. Like the ones that my friends were making fun of, I ended up
Yeah.
going to that same one. I asked the priest, I told him I wanted to be part of RCA and become Catholic. I was convinced. And, in my own private setting, just thinking, I was like, you know what? I have to make the decision. I want to become Catholic. And I said, I am Roman Catholic. And I said that a few times, and it was as if the walls around me shook when I actually just said it firmly.
Yeah.
And so I went to the priest and I said, you know what, I want to become Catholic and I want to join RCIA. If that's how it works here, I don't know. But I went there, and I believe it was for the Easter Mass for Easter Sunday. And so then the journey went on from there. And so I started attending the RCIA class or meetups that they would have. Um, I didn't necessarily talk or ask too much. Sometimes I would say a question, but I was really just wanting to learn and
Absorb it.
hear what
Yeah.
the priest said and what those in the group said. So, there was a book that I would buy myself, and I don't know if anyone recommended this book to me, but I got this book and I would read it, and it's the Confessions by Saint Augustine.
Ooh. Okay.
And I would start reading this book, and I finished it, I believe, before my baptism. The day before my baptism, or it might have been leading into the day thereof, but it was before my baptism that I actually finished it. So I was very happy in that sense about that. And again, that book too, it was like I felt like I was reading my own story, as it were. And then I
Yeah.
came to find out that everyone who's read that book felt the same way. It's like it's an interesting book. You feel like you're reading your own biography, as it were. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, where did Saint Augustine lead it to the church? So I may as well just that may as well be where my story leads as well. And there's also I don't know if this is part of the confession, but there's also a little additional part at the end of this book, or at least this copy, that's like some of his philosophical insights that I thought was very interesting.
Hmm.
Being a thinker or whatnot, as you
I'll put a
mentioned.
link to that book below. I need to order that too. I haven't read that book, so
Oh yeah, it
maybe.
can take a while. It was dedication for me to read it, but I got through it. So
Yeah.
and I would not be against an abridged version either, but that's obviously your preference.
Right.
So there's a lot of details I feel like, well, was that necessary? But it's a good book, especially when you end it, like a lot of things. But yeah, I mean, it was very profound. Uh, so when I became Catholic, um, uh, the day of, so I was baptized, I received confirmation, and I received my first Holy Communion. So when I was baptized, I remember um, when I was baptized, when the water hit me, it it was almost like it became thick like oil or honey.
Hmm.
And having read the Bible, that gave me dramatic imagery,
Right.
references of, well, being anointed with oil or honey, and so that gave me insights. And when the water hit me, I like it felt as though I could feel every cell in my body from head to toe release itself of lifelong chains. And I did not know that they were there up to that point. And so and it wasn't like they were like killed or gotten rid of. It felt like they weren't there to begin with. In a sense, I was born again. I was just new.
Yeah.
Like whatever was before wasn't
All
there
those
anymore.
burdens are gone.
And so, and I just didn't. I never felt so present. And so, as the Lord Jesus Christ says in the Holy Gospel, to be born again of water and spirit. So when I was baptized in water, born again in that water and spirit, and then after that, I received confirmation. And so my sponsor, she had her hand on my shoulder. And when the priest, and this was during, I should have context, this was during the pandemic.
Hmm.
So the bishop wasn't able to come. And so this was a rare circumstance.
Okay, so we were kind of going through at the same time. So yeah,
This was a rare circumstance in which the priest could
the
give me
priest got to do it.
confirmation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when he anointed me with the oil, it was as though I felt a cloud, a visible cloud. And when I say visible, I don't mean I saw anything, but visible in the
You
sense that I
felt it.
felt it as something solid. A visible cloud possess each and every emptied cell in my body from head to toe, like just come down gently on me. It was such just a sweet feeling, as it were, of warmth.
Yeah.
And my sponsor who had her hand on my shoulder, she felt it too, but coming from me. And so that was,
Wow.
of course, the Holy Spirit. And of course, I received Jesus in Holy Eucharist, and I can never um, say enough on that, I suppose. But I was received into the church, and it was good. It was definitely good. So
Yeah.
that's where I was at, and so that was on let's see if I get this right, June 24th, 2021, and I was
Okay.
18 years old. So I'm 21 now, so it's been 2 years.
Is that the
Yeah,
same? What was Pentecost Sunday? Was it Pentecost Sunday you joined?
no, it was I believe the nativity of Saint John the
Okay,
Baptist.
Pentecost is gonna be May. Yeah, so I came into the church Pentecost Sunday 2021
Hmm.
is when I came in. Like we started
And
RCA in 2019.
were you already baptized or?
Yeah, I was already baptized, so it was just confirmation and first Holy Communion.
Right, right. Yeah, so I'm going to get into my dream in a little bit, but down the line, I would say maybe 2 years of being Catholic, a year and a half around that. This June, I suppose I'll be 3 years of having been a Catholic Christian in the Catholic Church. So
Hmm.
1.5 years or so. Uh, so basically, I found a quote, and it was by a saint, And so this is where I have to get into my dream. Back to when I was 13 years old or so, on that Easter, I had a dream, as I mentioned earlier, and so now I'll get into it. So the dream went like this. I saw it was like a movie kind of. There was these very bright green valleys, and there was a castle far away, and there was this man that was like a peasant. There's no kind way of putting it, carrying some sort of heavy cart of some kind to this castle. And then the scene shifted to where I was inside the castle from the point of view of whoever was on the throne. And
Okay.
in this case, it was a female figure, a queen or princess. And this peasant, no light way of putting it, approached me with a crown, and he handed me this crown. It was like gold, silver, all these rare gems, and it was like a movie where the gems on this crown were radiating the colors that they
Yeah.
showed that they had, and so it was glaring towards me. It was very, very interesting. But then the person said they halted, they rejected the crown, and I was like, well, that's very interesting. So they rejected it, and the words they spoke were these: Why should I wear a crown of silver and gold and precious stone? Why should I wear a crown of silver and gold when my Lord wore a crown of thorns and wore it for me? And especially that last part was said with conviction.
Yeah.
So I'm already Catholic for 2 years, and this is I'm scrolling on Instagram actually, and I find a quote from a saint, and it's from Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, which is exactly that quote. That's her famous quote. So at 13 years old, I had a dream of a Catholic saint. Their quote, well, it had no place in my mind up till then. So,
Right.
and
That's crazy.
and the dream meant a lot too to me for a while. Uh, but then it kind of dawned on me that, well, that's interesting. So that's why I say, in some sense, God was always leaning me towards His
Yeah.
church,
He
even
was
when I was
always
an
calling you.
anti-Catholic Protestant.
That is an
So
unbelievable. That is so cool. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, no, I'm kind of jealous. That's awesome, man. Like that's really cool. To
yeah,
have something when you're a 13-year-old to have it come to fruition years and years later, and you're like, wow, that's what I
mm.
was having.
And
That's crazy.
it was like God was holding that back from me, knowing like till I actually became Catholic, as it were, right? Like that was
Yeah,
something else that's very interesting. But yeah, so I've been received into the Catholic Church, and yeah, I'm here. Yeah,
praise
I'm not sure what
God.
else to add to that right now. I mean, I could think, but I don't know if you have any questions or whatnot. But
No, I think, man, that's a beautiful story, and um, I love what I really love about your story is that no matter what you try to do, God was constantly calling you home. You know, you were
mhm,
doing everything you possibly could to be like, nope, 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 and he's like, no, I'm sorry, dude, you're
yeah,
mine.
and the fact
Um,
that the church that I would go by so many times where my friend would make fun of it, that was the same church that I would be baptized in. So I know I didn't see
that's
that coming.
that's amazing. So, are you still friends with those same friends that know you're Catholic
No,
now,
no,
or
I
okay?
don't think it. No, it doesn't have anything to do with my faith. Even it just time goes by, right?
Yeah, no, I
The whole
mean, I
thing.
don't talk to anyone I went to high school with,
And
but I mean,
I
I am
changed I
43,
changed
so
high schools too, so I'm not graduated, but
yeah, I know. I'm just saying, time
mhm,
goes on, and those relationships are kind of they
yeah.
fade.
There are some people that I still talk to occasionally, but it's just like, hey, how are you doing? It's like I
Yeah,
don't know where that's going to go. I mean, maybe sometime it will go somewhere, but I'll
you
have to
never
see.
know.
Hmm.
Well, dude, I think your story's beautiful, and I'm glad that I finally got to have you on my channel. Seriously, like that's a really cool story. And I hope that it inspires other people to continue their journey home to the Catholic Church. And just thank you so much for coming on. Um, I'll definitely leave a link to your channel below. And keep doing videos, man.
Yeah.
I love the concept that you were doing, dude. That was just different, and I was like, okay, this guy's cool. I like this. So yeah, get around to getting back on that. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, the I don't really have anything to like share other than my YouTube channel and which is just my name, Brandon Danilition. And I have one video on there at the moment, so if you want, you watch that. Make popcorn,
It's cool,
make
guys.
coffee, whatever.
Check it
Yeah,
out.
it's cool. Okay,
It
it's pretty
is.
cool.
It's just different. I love it. That's what I like. I was like, this is different. I like it. So,
Thank you.
anyways, yeah, it was awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And everybody, please like, share, and subscribe. Daniel or Brandon, thank you so much. Praise God for your conversion and your story there. And I really do hope that it inspires others. So keep it up, brother. And thank you very much.
Thank you.